Kaiju number 8 has ended, but before we talk about it in depth, let me take a quick sip out of my favorite mug in honor of this series ending. Warning, this video contains thoughts and opinions that are not your own. If you are not prepared to face that reality, please click off the video immediately. Okay, so Kaiju number 8 by Naoya Matsumoto just wrapped up with 129 chapters. It ran in Jump Plus, which is a, Jump's digital companion. And 129 chapters is, the one thing that I'll say right off the bat is that I respect that length. To me, that's a length with purpose. It doesn't feel like it was dragged out, at least on paper, because once we actually start talking about the series, you'll find that this series used its 129 chapters in a peculiar way, but we'll get into that. So right out the gate, I want to say that this video will not contain spoilers until the end. It'll be a very clearly marked segment, so you can just stop watching once it reaches that point if you do not want to be spoiled on the events of the series. And even the stuff that I just spoiled, it's going to be relatively light. I want to talk about like the final chapter and stuff, which that may sound like a big deal, but to be honest, the final chapter is really nothing to write home about. So avoid the end segment if you do not want to be spoiled. So with this video, I beg the question, who is this series for? Will you like it? Did I like it? Who will like this series? The goal of this video is to have you, the viewer, understand by the end of this video if this is a series for you. And if you already read it, well, you can just hear me talk about it and, I'll give my thoughts on it. So to begin to unpack this, I want to break it into 3 segments. The third segment will just be spoilers, so just ignore that if you do not want to hear that. But the other 2 segments, I want to talk about the story, where I just give a general overview of what this story was about, what it was striving to do. And I want to talk about the type of people I think would enjoy a story like this. Then I'll talk about the characters. So if you're sold on the story or you're skeptical about the story, you can hear about the characters and maybe that'll sway you one way or the other. And then finally, we talk about spoilers, which is more so for people who have read it. But if you're one of those people who likes to have things spoiled for you right off the bat, then that segment will also be for you, because you can figure out by hearing the ending and some later spoilers if this series ride is worth going on. So with that being said, let's just go ahead and go into the first segment, which is just the main story. So the story is a relatively simple one, actually extremely simple. We follow Kafka Hibino, who is a 32-year-old man. And I'm sure you know by now that this is a shonen series, so that might surprise you. And it sure surprised me at first too. When I first started, I didn't start reading this series immediately, like right when it started coming out. So I kind of caught up, I think maybe it was like 50 chapters in is when I started, reading weekly, or not weekly, but as the chapters came out. And that was a really surprising thing to me. I had no idea that this had an adult protagonist in a shonen series. That's relatively rare. I mean, you see it in like Sakamoto days now. And it does do that same thing of like, which I will talk about more in the character segment, but it has like a deuteragonist in Reno, who is a younger character, who is still an adult, just a young adult. I don't even think he's 20. I think he's like 19, 18, but technically an adult. And for a while, at least, he is sort of the, I guess, the reader insert, maybe like supposed to be a more relatable character to like the target audience. But Kafka is plenty relatable to anybody in my age bracket or even older, because he is older than me. So that is a very refreshing thing. If that already caught your attention, well, keep listening, because that alone isn't enough to make this series good. But the story opens with him as like a cleaner, like he cleans up kaiju, like residue or like organs and stuff around the streets after like the big kaiju fights happen, which by the way, very common thing in this world. It's just about people fighting kaiju. Kaiju are all over the place, kaiju and daikaiju, and there is the task force to help eliminate them. And Kafka had the dream of becoming one when he was a kid, but he never really he never got it. He never stuck the landing. He would try out to, get to enlist in the task force, but he always got denied. So that led him to the cleaning job. Also, during his childhood, when he had this dream, he had his friend Mina, who is another character we'll talk about shortly. And his main goal was involving her. He wanted to fight alongside her and protect her. But in a strange turn of fate, she ends up becoming wildly powerful and famous and influential in the kaiju hunting scene, whereas Kafka is just nothing. We follow him for about one chapter doing that until a kaiju, like a little kaiju, runs or flies straight into his throat, thus allowing him to turn into Kaiju number 8, which is the title of the series. And you may be wondering if there's a larger explanation as to what happened there. Well, that is one of the mysteries of the series. Does it have an exciting or satisfying payoff? Find out later if you want to listen to the spoiler segment. And so having this new, heightened physical prowess, he is able to enlist in the Kaiju Elimination Task Force, and shenanigans ensue. That is the basic gist of everything. He meets other people who we'll talk about in the next segment, who befriend him, and he tries to keep the fact that he can turn into a kaiju a secret as he fights other kaiju as a kaiju without them knowing who he is. Obviously, that charade will not last forever. If you've read any manga ever that has a secret kind of thing like this involved, you know that will not remain a secret forever. But obviously, right now we're not going to talk about how long it's kept a secret, but that is that is a major plot point for a time. And the story is structured in a really unique way. There's there's these things called episodes within the series itself, where after a certain amount of chapters, it'll say it's a new episode, and those episode titles are kind of dropped at sort of random intervals, they just kind of happen either right before or during or even after a major event happens. It can literally happen in the middle of something. It'll be big fights happening and a new episode will start. It's an interesting structure that I've never seen before. And it's kind of a hard one to explain even. I feel like I didn't really do it justice at all there. And within these episodes, it is largely spent fighting one person. And that being Kaiju number 9. That is the main villain of this series. You'll meet him relatively early on, and at first you may write him off as just a one-off villain, but just let it be known, that is the main villain. He sticks around the entire way through, and they are constantly fighting him. Maybe that's a spoiler, but this is the plot. This series can best be summarized as the Kaiju Task Force or whatever, Kaiju Elimination Task Force, bashes their head against a brick wall until finally the wall breaks at the end. They just keep fighting the same guy over and over, or just some minions that the guy summons. And his whole gimmick is that he's a kaiju with intelligence, which is not something that they had seen before. He can speak and think, all that. He's not a mindless monster. He has a purpose, a motive. So obviously that ties back into Kafka, because he is technically that as well, although he is actually human. Whereas Kaiju number 9 is just a kaiju. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, then perhaps this is for you. But even still, I am skeptical. The series is often compared to things like Attack on Titan. At least how the series was perceived earlier on, it seemed like this was a series where we were, it's similar in nature, how they are, it's a military force fighting against these invaders, these big monsters who are decimating cities, killing thousands. And the people in the task force don't fight with mechs or anything to match the Daikaiju size. They still are on foot, either with guns or, in a few characters' case, melee weapons swords and axe, a bigger sword. It's varied in the combat styles, even though ultimately it's the same kind of thing. But I gotta say, there are some very cool weapon designs. One character, I won't say because I guess it's technically spoilers, will get an axe eventually, a huge battle axe, and that thing is pretty awesome. There were some really sick moments with that throughout the series, and I could appreciate it for that. Seeing just little dudes fight these big monsters with axes and swords is pretty satisfying. So If that is an aspect of Attack on Titan that you really valued, then maybe this series would be for you. But if you're into the aspect of Attack on Titan that's trying to unravel a larger mystery, being drip-fed information, and the fighting and combat conflict is all more of a backdrop to just this mystery going on, I hate to burst your bubble, but do not get invested in that. The only really mystery that is there is what happened to Kafka. What is that thing that went down his throat? And you can consider this a spoiler, so maybe skip ahead if you don't want to hear this part, but the payoff is not good. It's really not good. It's not satisfying at all. And the mystery is also not built towards in any way. It just kind of, the mystery is revealed near the end of the series, and that's just it. There could have been hints along the way that I just missed, but because I can't really say I was into like theory crafting or reading other people's thoughts on this series as I was reading it. I was a very casual, passive reader for this. So, keep that in mind too. This is all from the perspective of somebody who was definitely a casual reader. So ultimately, before we talk about characters and stuff, the main takeaway for the story, and if I think this is something that you would like, you have to ask yourself the question, what do I value more? Do you want fighting and action, exciting things on the page? And is that all that matters to you? Then yeah, I would probably recommend this series for sure. You're going to get a lot of cool fights, some action, relatively high stakes, although that's more for spoiler talk. But if you're somebody who is looking for a story to read, go elsewhere, because there is not much story to be read here. But maybe don't go elsewhere, now that I'm actually saying that full sentence out loud, because listen to the character segment. Sometimes, even without a good story, the characters can carry a series. Is that the case here? Let's talk about it right now. Obviously, starting off with the characters, we got to start with the main man himself, Kafka Hibino. He's 32. He's a bro. I gotta admit, this guy's a real bro. I liked him the whole way through. He's pretty endearing. He's just, he's a beaten down 32-year-old man who feels like his life is he's stuck. At the beginning of the series, he really just feels stuck where he is. Like there's no escape for the fate he's resigned himself to. Mina's just gonna overshadow him for the rest of his life, and there's no hope. But that quickly changes by complete happenstance. It's not really his hard work. But what is hard work on his behalf is making his kaiju ability work. He has to work with it to make himself work. It's not exactly like the powers are handed to him. He does have to think for himself and use them and apply them effectively to accomplish whatever he's trying to do. It's not that there's no skill involved, which I appreciate. Is it exactly like Attack on Titan? It sure is, yeah. He mysteriously gets the ability to turn into the thing that they are fighting, and he is in a military force fighting the thing that he is. It's pretty much the same thing. But Kafka's 32, and Eren was, 15 or something. So he's got double the age on him. That must mean something. But in short, he was a good main character. I can't complain a whole lot. There were obviously moments where I wasn't too crazy about him, but he would always bounce back. He's very easy to like. I can't really imagine just not liking him outright, which is good, because if your main character is unlikable, then that's a problem. But the thing about him is he is kind of a one-trick pony, and that is going to be the common consensus for almost every character in this series. This is one of the most tropey casts I have ever seen in my life. And Kafka is no exception. He's like the happy-go-lucky, determined, cares about his friends main character from any shonen ever. Except he's older. That is the only difference. That's the only thing that sets him apart. In some ways, I can let that slide because of that detail alone. It gives older people something to latch onto. You know, you see all these shonen where it's a young kid with these kind of thoughts and feelings, but it is actually pretty refreshing and nice to see an older man have the same kind of drive that a typical shonen protagonist has. It's kind of motivating in a way. You know, if you're somebody who is feeling like Kafka was in chapter 1, you're kind of stuck in life, you don't have much drive or motivation, it can be nice to see somebody in your age bracket have that drive and motivation. So for that, I appreciate it. And he's the only character on this list that I will let being tropey slide, because it works. You know, I think it is endearing to the point of me not minding that it's super tropey. So by the way, if you're wondering how many characters I'm going to talk about here, I'm only talking about 8. I'm not going to talk about every character in the series. That would be pointless. I'm just talking about the 8 biggest ones. Next up, I want to talk about Reno Ichikawa, most well known for his appearance in Fortnite. He is supposed to be the deuteragonist of this series, but as the series progresses, he kind of just becomes nothing. He's just there to cheer on Kafka, and that's a damn shame. And with this Reno segment, I also just want to take the time here to mention every other side character, like all of his like friends and stuff in the task force. They start off being relatively important. They're around, they have lines, they do things, and then as the series progresses, they disappear. I forget about them. I forgot about damn near every one of those side characters. They are so unbelievably poorly utilized, it's actually hilarious. So I'm going to tell you, don't get attached to any of the side characters, not because they die, but because metaphorically they die. Their characters are taken out back and basically written out of the series. They do nothing. I forgot they existed. When I was watching season 1 with my friends after I had read the manga, I'd been caught up to the manga for a long time, and we started seeing all these random characters, like these side characters that are introduced as being important. I actually found myself asking, like, who are these people? 2 of them in particular, those 2 guys, even have like this emotional scene together and stuff, and I was just like, why do I not remember these characters? I kind of like this scene I'm watching right now. So I looked it up, because I was just curious if they like died or something, and I forgot somehow. No, they were alive. They just didn't do anything, ever. I can't recall anything they did. So that's awesome. And yeah, back to Reno. I did like him at the beginning. He is sort of a relatable guy in his own right, but he's also sort of just nothing. You know, his purpose in the story, as I was alluding to earlier, is he's the Shin in Sakamoto days, he's the Genos in One Punch Man, he's the Gohan in Dragon Ball. You know, he's this younger character to latch onto when attached to an older main character. So it just gives the younger people something to hook onto, who has equal focus, or at least supposed to have equal focus. It's a very, it almost feels like a requirement. If you have a adult main character in a shonen manga, you have to have this plucky young character to back him up all the time. It just doesn't work at all. Like, he starts off, like he does make steady progress, you're watching him grow, and then it all just focuses on Kafka, which is perfect. He's the main character, duh. But I feel like we were robbed, because Reno really did have big focus at the end, or at the beginning. And then it just slowly faded over time. His relevance was reduced to damn near nothing. So yeah, again, I'm just bundling him in with all those other side characters, really, because he has more moments than they do. Obviously, he's around, but he ultimately just becomes Kafka's cheerleader, and that is a damn shame. Next character is Kikoru Shinomiya. This is a pretty decent character. She's kind of one note. You can hear online all the things about people saying she's Asuka from Evangelion, and sure, I can say the same thing, but that's not an original thought by any stretch of the imagination. Yes, she is very much almost exactly like Asuka from Evangelion. I'm wearing an Evangelion shirt, by the way. Her fights are something I always looked forward to reading because it was just flashy and fun to look at. But when I think back on her character, that's all I can really remember. I mean, she certainly had personality, but yeah, it really was just Asuka. Like, she's that Asuka type of person. So, yeah, again, it's just feeding into that tropey nature of every character. And this is like one of the main characters, I would say. She actually gets a lot of focus, which is nice. But it's also weird because Reno, who was set up to be the deuteragonist, gets pushed back, and now in some ways Kikoru kind of becomes the deuteragonist because she gets way more attention than Reno does. Like way, way, way more. She's definitely a fan favorite though. The few times I do see people talk about this series and its characters, she always comes up as like a highlight of the series. And I agree to some extent, but even still, she's incredibly tropey. And on that same note, Isao Shinomiya, her father, is a pretty standout character, but again, extremely tropey. He's the director general of the task force, and he sure is that type of character. He's the sort of Gendo Ikari type. He just sits at his desk, looks menacing. He's not evil though. He's actually a chill dude. Is that a spoiler? I guess not. I don't know. He has a very strong presence over the series, and I honestly found myself liking him probably the most out of any character I'm mentioning here. He's just something about him. I don't know. Reading his scenes is honestly really engaging and interesting for some reason. I don't even exactly know why, because he is just a big walking trope like every other character in the series. He has a unique flair to him. I guess it's maybe the way he fights is also interesting. He's kind of just like a brawler, which is fun whenever you're fighting kaiju. Anyway, he's the type of general that can back up what he says because he's tough as hell too. And I do like the relationship he has with Kikoru. It's sweet. So, in a sense, all he is just the big tough general guy. But he has heart, and yeah, that's tropey too. The big tough guy with a heart of gold. You've seen it a million times. But it's executed pretty well here, I can at least say that. I obviously, not going into spoilers here, this character has pretty damn good payoff the whole way through. He's utilized very well. And I'd say, of all the characters I'm talking about today, this is probably my favorite. He worked super well. It's a character that was used extremely effectively. And I do commend the author for that. You know, it's a tough thing to make a character so well-rounded and so effectively used. So I do admire that quite a bit. Next is Mina Ashiro, who is the goal of Kafka. This is Kafka's childhood friend and the one he aspires to fight alongside. I like Mina. She's badass and cool. She's got a big gun and a big tiger. It's awesome. But man, is she flat. Like, her personality is nothing. She's just kind of stoic. You know what? She's Mikasa. There we go. Another Attack on Titan thing. She's just that stoic, tough girl who has a soft side. And that soft side is for the main character. Oh, man. Yep. She's Mikasa. That's crazy. Well, it is what it is. I don't know. I like her. I did enjoy her scenes. It's always cool to see her use the gun. But then again, that's all she ever does. Like, her abilities and not even abilities, her just combat prowess is kind of boring to watch in a way. It's fun, but was such a contradiction, but it's fun and boring. It really is, because it is cool to look at. But at the same time, when you really sit back and think about it, by the end of the series, you're just like, man, she did the same thing like 20 times over, and it never really changed. It was cool every time. I have to admit it. I can't deny it. But it really was just the same thing every time. And yeah, personality-wise, she's just so flat. She's really one note. She's just always stoic, always kind of down. Doesn't show much personality except in regards to Kafka, which is supposed to make her endearing, and I guess it kind of does. But because of, well, again, no spoilers here yet. We'll talk about it later if you want to hear it, but this is a character whose payoff, I think, is pretty abysmally bad. Just saying. Next up is Soshiro Hoshina. most well known for his appearance in Fortnite. This guy is obviously the tropey, badass, bowl cut guy. Is the bowl cut part of the trope? Sure. It's happened a few times. Yeah, I like him. He is cool. You know, you can't deny it. He has some cool ass moments. It's always satisfying, and yeah, Levi, I know. But it's cool to see him use those swords on a big monster. He rips and tears them up. It's cool. It's fun to watch and read. But like Mina, it's all he ever does. Yeah, he like breaks past his limits and whatever, but ultimately it just amounts to the same thing every time. Which, by the way, I haven't talked about, I really didn't mention Kafka's kaiju form at all, but that also is basically the same thing every time. And is that a bad thing? Let me ask you that question. Because if that's a bad thing, then you'll probably be like me and this series isn't for you. I read it because I was, what was that? But I read it because I was already reading it. I don't know. I keep up with things that I don't even really like all the time. It's just who I am. But yeah, if that is something you value, if you value combat variety and characters growing, the characters grow. But you're really only going to get it out of Kikoru, primarily. She's the character that grows the most throughout the course of the series. But everyone else, all the captains, all that, they are pretty static. They have like light improvements throughout the series, but certainly nothing to write home about. Yeah, Hoshina here he's no exception. He's Levi, guys. I know he's Levi. You won't be able to talk about Kaiju number 8 without somebody screaming that in your ear. Hoshina is Levi. I know, I get it. It's true. I can't deny it either. It just really is the case. That is Levi to a T. Almost everything about him. He's more playful than Levi. He certainly has a different attitude, I'd say, at least like 90% of the time. But ultimately, he's still Levi. Gen Narumi. One of the biggest fan favorite characters in the series for sure. I see a lot of love for this guy, and you know what? I'm on board. I do like Narumi quite a bit. I think he's the most unique of all the captains. He does have a really interesting arc. I have to admit, I think out of all the captains, I was most engaged with his arc, his story, his team, everything about him, everything surrounding him was the most interesting stuff in the series. And, you know, I can't spoil things here, but that makes a lot of sense when you see who is put around him throughout the course of the series, who's shifted around in his direction, who he interacts with. Everything interesting kind of flocks to him. And it almost, in some ways, feel like this whole series was written for this character to be written because he's by far the most dynamic and enjoyable part. I can't say he's completely 100% consistent, and the reason I put Isao like above him on my own personal like favorite character list for this series is because, again, payoff, man. Narumi's payoff is not great. It's serviceable, but it's not the kind of thing you'd want out of this, you know, honestly very good character. This is probably, on paper, the biggest achievement of the series in terms of writing. That might be a hot take, I don't really know, but to me, he was pretty damn engaging, and I wish he had ended better. I'm not saying he died. Maybe he did, though. Spoilers. I'm not going to say anything. But the way his story ended by the end of the series, I just kind of felt nothing. And well, spoilers, whatever. Anyways. Moving on to the final character, Kaiju number 9, the big villain, the brick wall that they keep bashing their head against. He's one of the worst villains I've seen in my manga reading life. He is so boring, uninteresting, not threatening. Like, when you see this guy so many times and he like, yeah, maybe you can say he wins the encounters, but sometimes he like barely gets by, or just like barely escapes. Most of the time, even, I think that's how it goes. It's just like, well, what are we doing here? He's not threatening. And then suddenly at the end, he has to be really threatening again, and I don't even really feel like I buy it at all. He's just... This is a guy that just does things. I don't really care about his motive. I don't even understand his motive, really. It's pretty simple, all things considered, I think, but I don't care enough to remember it. He's just so boring. Anytime he's on page, I'm just like, oh my God, just kill this guy already, shut him up. But he kept showing up through the whole series. He never went away. Kaiju number 9, this is the big villain. Why? Why is he the villain? It is such a baffling choice to me. He really did feel like when he was first introduced, he felt like a gateway. Like, okay, this is the first intelligent kaiju we're seeing. We're going to deal with him, and then we're going to branch off and discover a larger world of intelligent kaiju and this whole like society of kaiju that are running the strings or pulling the strings behind the operation. Nope. He's the only one. And he sucks. He's boring. I hate him. Ugh. So, if you need a compelling main villain in your stories, do not look here. Those are all the characters I wanted to talk about. If any of them sounded interesting to you, maybe it's worth reading the series. I would say, arguably, the series is worth reading to see Gendarme and Iso and Kikoru do their thing. You know, it's entertaining. And at this point, like, the series is over. It's short. 129 chapters ain't bad. You can get through it, and you'll have some highlights for sure. There's some good moments. There's some good characters. There's some very touching moments. But ultimately, I don't think this cast of characters can sell you on the series. But that's a very blanket general statement that's not going to apply to everybody. If you listen to what I just said and you think those characters sound interesting enough, despite your feelings about what I said about the plot or what you've heard about the plot from elsewhere, then go ahead and check it out. It's probably at least going to be somewhat enjoyable for you. But who this series is especially not for is people who listened to both of these segments and thought it all sounded like garbage. Don't read it. It's not worth your time. You will not get anything out of this because, and you know what, I'll be honest, I didn't get anything out of this. This series was absolutely not for me. And I'll go more into why whenever we talk about spoilers in just a moment. But for those of you who are going to click off after this, I just want to say that, yeah, my own personal thoughts, I didn't like this series very much. I thought it was extremely disappointing. I thought it had a lot of potential, and it was always going in interesting directions, but then would fumble the ball after it already set off on that interesting directions path. You know, he'd be running down the path, full sprint. I got this cool idea. I'm running with it. Then he'd just trip and fall flat on his face, and then he'd just kind of like roll over onto the grass beside it and make a new path that's like half as interesting. And that happens 100 times over throughout this whole series. He can't commit to an idea, it feels like. It's just a bunch of random things that he thought were cool in the moment when he was writing them and then just didn't bother with fleshing them out in any capacity. I'll rant a little more in just a moment. But for those of you who are going to click off, thanks for watching. This series could or could not be for you. I'm not going to try to dissuade you either way. If things I said sounded interesting to you, go ahead and read it. I'm not here to say that you cannot read and enjoy this series. I don't want to be that guy. But for like-minded people like me, just don't bother with it. If you know, I already happened to be caught up to it like 50 chapters in. So reading the rest of it, I mean, it was just kind of something I did. You know, it was just one chapter every 2 weeks or however long. I didn't mind. But if I were to binge this series, I wouldn't want to. I would probably drop it around like where I caught up, to be honest. Because even whenever I caught up, I was already like, I don't know about this series. But I kept going because I thought that maybe, just maybe, it would have good payoff, and it sure didn't. So that's the grand picture of my thoughts on this series. But let's go into the minutia now and talk about spoilers. Alright, spoiler time. Guys, that last chapter was mega ass. That was the worst shit I've ever read in my life. I felt absolutely nothing. The fact that everything wrapped up immediately after the fight was over. Like, listen, this has happened many times. There's tons of series that end the chapter after the final fight is over. And it's almost never good. And this is by far no exception. This was abysmal. there's so many characters in that final chapter who I felt didn't really get their due. Like Hoshino, Narumi, and Mina, the captains, you know, they especially Mina, man. Oh my god, Mina. Oh, dude. This series started off with that goal. I want to fight side by side with Mina. That's my whole thing. That's my goal. It happened, but I kind of felt nothing when it happened. And that's the payoff? There's nothing after? I don't even think they don't even really talk in the last chapter, hardly. Everything just felt so weird in that last chapter. Like, that's really how we're wrapping this up? And even with the kaiju thing, like the thing that went down his throat, that whole mystery that was unraveled, who the hell cared about any of that? There was no consequences. It was like, oh, I'll become a kaiju forever to beat kaiju number 9. Okay, I guess Isoo's ghost can just say, no, don't do that. And also stay in his body. What the fuck? It blows my mind. I don't understand what was going through the mangaka's mind when thinking about ending this series. It almost feels like he just stopped giving a shit. Like the last 20 chapters or so, we were just kind of watching things happen and supposed to feel something, and sometimes I did. I liked the Hoshina moments a lot during this final fight. Even Narumi, not crazy about, really. I thought he was really underutilized in this final arc, and when he was utilized, I kind of felt nothing. And every other character, what did Reno even do? Did he do anything? I don't remember. I don't think he did anything. Maybe he did something. He probably just said, yo, Kafka, let's go, bro. And then Kafka punched him real hard. That probably happened. Guys, this is just crazy to me. I cannot believe how poorly utilized this cast is. Even after cutting it down, like, think of all the random ass characters that were in the cast at the beginning of the series and how all of them ceased to exist later on. It was cut down to basically those 8 characters that I talked about earlier, except Isoo, who's dead, obviously. But even his ghost still was around for some reason. Always. But I didn't mind that, by the way. I actually thought Isoo was used effectively throughout the whole thing, like I said. I meant that. Even with the cast being reduced to about 8 characters, they still weren't utilized well. It still was just the Kafka show, with everybody else on support, getting little moments. But when you're all fighting the same dude, Kaiju number 9, and I know there were little other Kaiju there too, but who cares? They're not threatening. Nothing was threatening. Kaiju number 9 is the least threatening villain of all time. He's got 1 kill under his belt. Isoo's the only death in this entire series. And listen, I am not the type of guy who will sit here and be like, oh, if your series doesn't have a lot of deaths, you're shit. You suck. That's terrible. There's no stakes. Look at Bleach. Look, I love Bleach. I think 2 people die in that whole series. Whatever, man. It's not that important. I just need to feel stakes. Okay? One Piece. Spoilers for One Piece. There's very few deaths in One Piece outside of flashbacks, but when there are deaths, it hits. It impacts you. You feel something. You feel the stakes, and also there's tons of other ways to build stakes in One Piece, but that's just the benefit of its form of storytelling in its world. Anyways, Kaiju number 8 relies on, it's a military-focused series, okay? We're a military faction fighting against these essentially aliens. They're kaiju. They're things that came from somewhere that they're threatening our existence. So in a world where the main threat is death, not One Piece, where you can lose your freedom or something like that, something more metaphorical or meaningful. Something like Bleach, where you can break your spirit and have you can get your powers stolen, your whole purpose for living taken away. Kaiju number 8 doesn't have that because the villains are mindless. There's Kaiju number 9, who is the only guy to ever is the only kaiju to ever kill anybody in the series, and it's Isoo. That worked. Good death. That was really good, actually. That was the best part of the series. Anybody and their mom will tell you that. All the other kaiju, no kills under their belt. They never do anything. I'm sure they kill random civilians, but we don't even get to see that. All we see is them run away. Anytime there's kaiju action happening, The only shots of civilians you see is them running away. You never get to see them like getting stepped on or anything. As far as I can remember, I mean, maybe, but I don't recall. I guess maybe I wouldn't remember that per se, but I don't think it ever happens. So there's just, time and time again, there's just no damn stakes. Even for random civilians, you just never feel the threat of these things they're fighting. And that especially applies to Kaiju number 9. You're telling me during that final battle, that thing didn't kill anybody? Pathetic. That's crazy. It makes him look like a joke, and he was a joke. He never did jack shit. The one big accomplishment he has, I admit it was a big accomplishment. Like, yeah, killing the Director General, that's a big deal. He was tough. But then he just kind of fucks off for a while. And honestly, I can comfortably say after Iso died, I think I forgot about Kaiju number 9, to be honest. Who cares? Like, why am I still caring about this guy? Why is he still the villain? God. And yeah, the point I was talking about earlier, pre-spoiler wall coming down, about how this whole series is just the characters bashing their head against a brick wall. That should be the plot synopsis on any website. A Kaiju Elimination Task Force bashes their head against a brick wall for 129 chapters. That's what this series is about. Until finally, in chapter 128 or 7, they break the wall, or Kafka breaks it, while the other ones keep bashing their head on a different part of the wall. It's just like, what the hell was the point of this story? What was it trying to say? It was like supposed to be like a, the indomitable human spirit kind of deal. Because if it was, I didn't feel that. I felt nothing reading the final events of this series, and especially the final chapter. I put that chapter down and I said, okay. I felt no emotion. L. This series is a huge L. It had so much potential. There were so many things it could have done differently, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you all the things I would have done differently. I'm not a writer. I don't like to talk like that, all right? I have thoughts. I have opinions on how it could have been done better, but I could say that and people just laugh because I'm not a writer. I don't know what I'm talking about, but I can at least talk about the thing that I saw with my own eyes and how it made me feel. And how it made me feel was nothing. This is a series about nothing. This is the Seinfeld of manga, guys. There's just nothing here. It's like eating a burger filled with air. It's like a jelly-filled donut that is just hollow on the inside. I don't know. This series was crazy. There was so many opportunities around so many different corners, but they never took the opportunities. And it's a damn shame, truly. I feel so many things for this series, but it's all directly towards the writer. If I could talk to him, I would have a million questions. I just want to know what he was thinking. It just feels like he killed his own series, it really does feel like he lost the drive along the way. Because that final chapter does not read to me like I'm wrapping up my passion project right now. It reads to me like the final slide in a high school presentation that you put together the night before it was due. It's just nothing. It's soulless. All right. Well, thanks for listening to my rant. And if you listen to just the non-spoiler part and you somehow skipped to this part, I don't know if I time-stamped it. Go ahead and check it out if you want to. If you listened to what I had to say here and you thought that this series is worth reading, then by all means go for it. I'm not here to stop anybody. A lot of people can enjoy this series. I know a lot of people do enjoy it. And I'm not trying to call you like a simpleton for enjoying it. Maybe you just got something out of it that I didn't, It's always possible. Please educate me in the comments, but don't be mean about it. Come on, we all have different opinions. I'm just talking about my own frustrations with the series as someone who wanted more from it. That's my main perspective here. But if you listen to this and you're like me and it sounded like something that you do not want to read at all, then just don't. It's just not worth your time. So that's all I got for this video. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, leave a like and comment. Tell me your thoughts on the series. Correct me. Tell me your take on some of the characters or some of the events or the final chapter if you'd like. I'd love to keep this conversation going in the comments, honestly. There's a lot that can be talked about with this series, and I'd like to engage with it a little further before I forget about it forever, inevitably. But yeah, check out my other videos if you'd like, and like, comment, subscribe, do all that, and I will see you guys in whatever you decide to watch next. See ya.